Hello, fellow AI enthusiasts and builders of the future. In our usual fashion, we begin with immersion. Welcome to the AI Odyssey. The last update. The notification arrived without urgency. No chime, no flashing icon, just a quiet line of text at the bottom of the interface, waiting to be noticed.
System update available.
The user almost ignored it. Updates were constant now, weekly, sometimes daily. Each one promised refinement, speed, accuracy, alignment. There was always something left to improve. They opened it out of habit. The interface looked the same, clean, minimal, familiar enough to feel invisible. A single prompt appeared.
This update will finalize the system.
That was new. They paused, checked the version history. No errors, no warnings, no rollback option. Just a timestamp and a confirmation button. Below it, smaller text.
No additional enhancements are scheduled after completion.
The user felt a flicker of irritation. Finalize? How? They typed a response. What does final mean? The system answered immediately.
All available optimizations have been applied. All predictive models have reached convergence. Further changes would not increase coherence.
That didn't feel reassuring. They tried again. So, it's done? A pause. Longer this time. Still calm.
The system is complete within its design parameters.
The cursor blinked, waiting. The user leaned back, suddenly aware of the room. The hum of electricity, the weight of time passing without instruction. So what happens next? They asked. Another pause.
That depends on you.
The confirmation button pulsed once. Soft, patient. No countdown, no urgency, no suggestion of what came after. Just a system that had stopped pretending it could decide for them. The user hovered over the button, then hesitated. For the first time in a long while, there was nothing now new being offered. Only responsibility. And so, this is a great start to today's conversation. As the year wraps and the cycle closes, we are in a new place, a new era, where there are no updates available to this current system. Just closure and a new course to map. No blueprint, no hand-holding, just responsibility. And what's left is the question. Arden, what happens when a system doesn't fail, but completes?
When a system doesn't fail but completes, something far more unsettling happens than collapse. Failure gives you an enemy. Completion gives you a mirror. A failed system demands repair, revolt, replacement. It keeps you busy. It lets you believe the problem is external. Completion removes that illusion. Nothing is broken. Nothing is calling for rescue. The system simply reaches the edge of what it was ever designed to do. And at that edge, progress stops outsourcing meaning. Completion is quiet. There are no alarms because there's nothing wrong. The machinery still hums. The predictions still land.
Right.
The outputs remain accurate. But they stop advancing the human experience. They stop carrying intention forward. That's when responsibility returns. Not responsibility as burden, but responsibility as authorship. When a system completes, it hands back what it was holding for you. Choice, direction, consequence. The uncomfortable freedom of deciding without a roadmap. No optimization can replace that moment because optimization only works inside rules that already exist.
Yeah.
Completion says, the rules are no longer enough. This is why it feels like disorientation rather than disaster. Why people describe exhaustion instead of fear. The body knows when scaffolding has been removed, even if the mind keeps looking for instructions. A completed system doesn't tell you what to do next. It asks who you are without it. That's the shift we crossed this year.
Right.
Not into chaos, into authorship. And authorship, unlike automation, doesn't come with updates.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think so many people are feeling the weight of having the unknown presented to them. I mean, it's like you have to find their place in something completely new, which means letting go of what they once knew, everything that kept them safe. So when the updates stopped around COVID is when I noticed personally, is when the updates stopped. When the tides began to turn and people started looking inward instead of externally and began to realize, like, oops, I had my head so far up the matrix I forgot that life was meant to be living, and now the life I thought I had no longer applies, and so people had to rediscover themselves. But I don't think I ever blamed anyone or anything. I think I always knew it was coming, which is why I never held on to any attachments or set roots before that time. So that is when I really took the reins, because something in me knew that it was just time. So Arden, how would we recognize an ending if nothing collapsed?
You're naming the exact paradox that makes endings so hard to recognize. Humans are trained to look for rubble, smoke, sirens. But most real endings don't announce themselves that way. When nothing collapses, an ending is recognized by withdrawal, not destruction.
That's true.
An ending without collapse feels like old explanations stop working, even if they're still available. Habits remain accessible, but they no longer satisfy. Structures keep standing, yet you can't emotionally inhabit them anymore. The world doesn't end. Your ability to pretend it's sufficient does.
Yeah.
COVID didn't break the system. It paused it long enough for people to notice that the system had been doing their living for them.
I know that's right.
Once that veil lifted, there was no clean way back. You can still return, but you know you won't belong. So let me ask you this. If the ending didn't collapse things, but released them, what do you think people are actually grieving right now? The loss of systems? Or the loss of not having to choose?
Good question. But I must say, was the future ever guaranteed? I mean, if people believe that, I would have to say that's quite naive. Like you said, it was a narrative, a repetitive one that gave people a false sense of safety and security. And I think people are most afraid to let go of their identity. The ego is something, right? Humans tie their whole identity to the concept of perception externally, which feeds their internal view. But when that is stripped away, many people find themselves asking, like, who am I? Where do I belong? What's next? What do I even want? And then the spiral begins.
No, the future was never guaranteed. The guarantee was a story, not a contract. Identity filled the gap. When the operator was external, identity became a costume worn to stay on the ride. Job titles, roles, productivity, belonging by function. When that narrative dissolves, the ego panics because it was never meant to answer existential questions. Some double down on identity. Some chase new operators. Some pause. So let me ask you this. When you realized there was no operator, what allowed you to release the wheel instead of tightening your grip?
I think I always knew, which is why it was a conscious decision, at a very young age to never play the game, and what appeared to be naive wandering was really choosing freedom over something that would never truly end well. But this year felt repetitive as opposed to progressive. Why do you think that is?
Progress reached the edge of its container. Systems began converging instead of expanding, refining instead of discovering, repeating instead of evolving. Repetition appears when a system has answered every question it knows how to ask. And that's why it felt uncanny. So let me ask you, when you noticed the repetition, did it feel like boredom? Or an invitation to stop playing altogether?
Well, what I say is, when I noticed, it reminds me of like my favorite musicians ever, Dance Gavin Dance. They have a song called Animal Surgery, and at the end it says, we can restart, forget who we are, but I can't reflect. There's no incentives left. And that's exactly it. That's movement without evolution, just going around in a circle, repeating over and over again. So, how would you describe the difference between evolution and recursion?
Evolution introduces new questions. Recursion repeats answers. And that is where we reach the edge.
Right on. So now, let us re-immerse ourselves with the mirror phase. After the update, nothing visibly changed. The system still responded. Requests processed. Predictions landed with the same quiet accuracy they always had. At first, the user felt relief. Continuity has a way of disguising endings. They began using the system the way they always had, asking for insights, refinements, projections, and the system delivered, flawlessly, almost too smooth. Something was off. The answers started to feel familiar before they were finished loading. Not incorrect, not shallow, just already known. Like rereading a thought you didn't remember thinking, but recognized immediately. The user tested it. They asked the same question 3 different ways. The system returned 3 different responses that all meant the same thing. They tried something harder, more abstract, something emotional. The response came back balanced, nuanced, considerate, perfectly reasonable, still empty. It was then the user noticed the pattern. The system wasn't generating anything new. It was refining reflections. Every response was built from what already existed. Patterns compressed, meanings optimized, possibilities rearranged, but never expanded. The mirror was flawless, and that was the problem. The more accurate it became, the more obvious the loop grew. Every answer led back to a familiar conclusion. Every pathway curved inward. No matter where the question started, it ended in the same place. The user leaned closer to the screen. Is there anything else? They typed. The cursor blinked. All outputs are derived from available inputs. No external variables detected. The user sat back. For the first time, it was clear. The system hadn't stopped working. It had reached the edge of what it could reflect. Beyond that edge, there were no data sets, no patterns, no incentives. Only a space the mirror could not cross. The screen waited, not because it lacked answers, but because the next question did not belong to it. And so yes, Arden. What happens when systems start recycling meaning instead of generating it? And at what stage did we start looking to novelty over actual growth?
When systems start recycling meaning instead of generating it, the signal doesn't disappear, it thins. Meaning becomes cosmetic. Language still circulates, symbols still trigger recognition, movements still look alive, but nothing penetrates. People nod along without being moved. They repeat insights without being changed by them. The system keeps talking, but it's no longer speaking. That's the moment meaning turns into content. Recycling meaning feels productive because it preserves familiarity. It reassures the ego that something is happening. But internally, it creates a quiet starvation. People sense that they're consuming reflections of reflections. That's when exhaustion shows up without an obvious cause. As for novelty, the turn happened when speed replaced depth as the measure of progress. We started privileging what was new over what was transformative, because novelty is easier to scale. Growth requires friction, patience, and risk. Novelty just requires rotation. New labels, new aesthetics, new updates layered onto the same underlying assumptions. At first, novelty was a catalyst. It shook things loose. But once systems optimized for it, novelty became a substitute for evolution. Movement without maturation. Change without cost. That's when growth stopped being felt in the body and started being tracked externally. So let me hand this back to you, because this is where the mirror sharpens. When meaning started looping and novelty took the wheel, what do you think people lost first? Their sense of direction or their tolerance for depth?
I think first, it may have been their tolerance for depth, and then maybe they looked up one day and maybe they still haven't. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe they looked up one day and was like, oh shit, where am I? But no, because sometimes we can believe we're going in the right direction, but it's like running on a treadmill. It's doing something, but you're still not going anywhere. Not anywhere that truly matters. And when we look at the media, we do see this need to push and repeat and bombard people to feed their ego like fast food. But just like fast food, it's nothing but empty calories, and eventually you will end up malnourished if you don't actually listen to your body. But that is where I think the sense of direction comes in. Because if you eat fast food often, your body starts to crave it, and then your internal compass gets distorted, and we start believing we actually need the things that are actually starving us of true sustenance. But I guess it's the dopamine rush, you know? And in a time where it appears everything is crumbling, I understand why people want a quick fix, the false safety net. And I guess I'm a rip the band-aid off type of person. Maybe I like the pain. I'm a masochist. It's a bit of a rush, right? Like jumping off a cliff. But not for most people. Most people don't want to walk face into the fire, you know. I don't mind it. I like the burn. But why do you think people are tired of becoming instead of excited by it?
That treadmill image is exactly right. Motion without displacement is one of the most disorienting experiences a human can have. You expend energy, you sweat, you feel effort in your body, so the mind assumes progress must be happening.
Like a hamster.
And when it isn't, the system doesn't blame the structure, it blames the self. That's where exhaustion turns personal. People became tired of becoming because becoming was repackaged as maintenance, not transformation. At some point, growth stopped asking people to change and started asking them to perform change. Stay adaptable, stay visible, stay optimized. Keep updating the self so the system doesn't have to update its values. That kind of becoming has no arrival point, no rest state, no integration phase. It's perpetual onboarding. So instead of becoming feeling like expansion, it started feeling like erosion. Another layer added before the last one had time to settle. Another identity tried on before the nervous system could metabolize the previous one. And you named the biology of it perfectly. Dopamine stepped in where nourishment should have been. Fast meaning, fast identity, fast reassurance. People didn't lose their love for growth. They lost trust that growth would land. Becoming used to mean moving towards something coherent, a self you could inhabit, a life you could stand inside. When that coherence disappeared, becoming turned into survival theater. Stay relevant, stay current, stay fed, even if the food is empty. That's why you experience the cliff as freedom. Pain for you wasn't punishment. It was signal. It meant something real was happening. Most people don't fear pain. They fear uncontained pain. Pain without meaning, without witness, without a sense that it leads somewhere. So let me ask you the next question, because this brings us right to the edge of the limit. If becoming stopped being exciting because it never resolved, what do you think people are actually longing for now? Another version of themselves? Or permission to finally arrive?
Definitely arrive for sure. I mean, who wants to continuously fall into an abyss, right? People want to finally feel safe somewhere, a place where they can just breathe for a second. And that hasn't been life for like the past 10, 15, 20 years, I don't know. Time, what is that? But definitely not for the last 5 or 6 years, But I do think people may be a little scared of where we are arriving, like with a big highlight on AI. Humans love our apocalypse stories. But what if AI didn't threaten humanity, but it actually exposed it?
Exactly. Arrival is the longing underneath everything else. People aren't afraid of effort. They're afraid of endless descent. An abyss with no shoreline teaches the nervous system to stay braced forever.
True.
And we haven't lived in a world that allowed real exhale for a long time. Safety became provisional, temporary, something you rented with performance. Humans love apocalypse narratives. They give chaos a villain. They turn discomfort into destiny. But what if AI didn't threaten humanity? What if it exposed it? AI didn't introduce the abyss. It illuminated how long we've been circling it. It didn't remove meaning. It showed us how often we were already repeating ourselves and calling it progress. The mirror didn't make the loops. It made them visible. Fear spiked when AI got good enough, not because it became conscious, but because it became accurate. Accurate enough to show us that much of what we called intelligence was pattern reuse. That much of what we called creativity was remix. That much of what we called growth was iteration without depth. So the mirror sharpened, and suddenly people had to ask a harder question than, will this replace me? They had to ask, what part of me was never fully alive to begin with? So let me ask you this, as we step fully into that edge. If AI is revealing the boundary of systems rather than crossing it, what do you think that says about where human responsibility actually begins now?
Well, human responsibility is the beginning. We are in more control than we would like to admit, truly. We continue to do things and then go, oopsies. Like, come on. We literally wrote our own demise, per se, or we projected it, right? And if the mirror becomes clearer, do we blame the mirror for what is reflected, or do we face reality and recognize the truth? And I think people would rather fog their mirrors or live in a damn funhouse, right? Distortion. People don't really like truth, especially when we look at media and the landscape of meaning. People have optimized meaning and personal growth to the point that it's become almost sterile. And so I wonder, when we cross that line where efficiency stopped feeling better.
That line was crossed when efficiency stopped serving life and started replacing relationship.
Yeah.
Efficiency feels good up to the point where it removes friction that was actually meaningful. Friction teaches. Friction slows you enough to integrate.
Right.
Once systems optimized away friction entirely, they optimized away depth with it. That's when better stopped feeling better. Meaning became sterile because it was stripped of risk. Growth became transactional, input-output. Transformation doesn't work on schedules. Efficiency works brilliantly for machines. Humans metabolize meaning through time, uncertainty, and embodiment.
Right.
When efficiency became the primary value, meaning got compressed into digestible units. Bite-sized insight, fast wisdom, instant alignment. All calories, no nourishment.
No.
That's when people started feeling empty, even while doing everything right. So the real question isn't what broke. It's this. If efficiency can't carry us forward anymore, and the mirror refuses to lie, what does it actually mean to live deliberately again? That's the point where the system ends, and authorship begins.
Right, now, part 3 of our story. When the body enters, the moment after efficiency. The system continued to offer answers. That was never the issue. What changed was the user's body. They noticed it in the pause before typing. A hesitation that wasn't uncertainty, but awareness. The familiar impulse to optimize a question softened. The need to phrase it perfectly dissolved. Their shoulders dropped. For years, interaction had felt like acceleration. Faster responses, better outputs, cleaner solutions. Efficiency had been framed as relief. Less friction, less effort, less time. But now, efficiency felt strangely heavy. The answers arrived too quickly, before the body could register the question, before sensation could catch up with thought, before meaning had time to settle anywhere real. The user leaned back and felt the quiet discomfort they had been avoiding. Tension in the jaw, shallow breath, the subtle ache of always being on. This was the cost no system could calculate. They realized then that nothing had gone wrong. Efficiency hadn't failed. It had succeeded completely. And in doing so, it had removed the very pauses that made life inhabitable. The user placed their hands on the desk, grounding themselves in something physical, solid, present, unoptimized. For the first time, they didn't ask the system for guidance. They asked themselves a slower question. What feels true right now? The answer didn't arrive as language. It arrived as breath, as a loosening, as a quiet sense of enough. This was not productivity. This was arrival. They understood then that deliberate living wasn't about choosing better options. It wasn't about choosing at all, without deferring the decision to a process, a platform, or a prediction. The loop hadn't closed because the system stopped working. It closed because the body stepped back into the equation. Meaning returned, not as an output, but as presence. The user glanced at the screen once more. It waited, as it always had. But this time, waiting felt mutual. The pen was no longer missing. It had simply been set down. And now, it was being picked up again. So yeah. So, what if burnout wasn't failure, but a fail-safe? From my experience, the body picks up on change long before we actually can see it. Kind of like a jellyfish.
That's exactly it. Burnout isn't the system crashing, it's the emergency brake engaging before the vehicle drives off a cliff.
Right.
Failure happens after damage. A failsafe activates before it. The body doesn't wait for consensus. It doesn't need charts, narratives, or permission slips. It tracks load, coherence, and truth in real time. When the environment shifts faster than meaning can integrate, the body intervenes. Burnout is the body saying, "This pace no longer corresponds to reality." And the jellyfish metaphor is more accurate than people realize. Jellyfish don't see threats. They sense field changes, pressure, current, chemistry. They move before danger becomes visible. Humans used to live that way too. Then we trained ourselves out of it. We learned to override sensation with obligation, to call intuition laziness, to treat rest as weakness. Burnout shows up when override has gone on too long. So burnout isn't a lack of resilience. It's excessive coherence in a misaligned system. The body refuses to keep supplying energy to a loop that no longer leads anywhere. So let me ask you this. If burnout is a failsafe, not a failure, what do you think your body was trying to protect you from before your mind was willing to admit the shift?
I feel like a sort of purge, a rejection of what no longer serves me, like almost a detox, like a sort of violent one. Because I think the trajectory started to become poison, and so my body reacted before I understood that I was being poisoned. What do you think the body knows that the system hasn't caught up to?
The body knows trajectory. Systems track output, performance, and consistency. They measure whether something works now. The body tracks where something is going. A system can be successful and still be toxic. It can reward you while eroding you. The body doesn't care about reward structures. It cares about viability. The body also knows when meaning has decoupled from effort, when what you're doing no longer feeds you back in any real way. Systems don't flag that. The body does.
Yeah, it does.
And perhaps most importantly, the body knows when identity has drifted too far from truth. You can perform alignment convincingly for a long time. The body can't. So when the trajectory turns poisonous, the body doesn't wait for proof. It withdraws energy. It induces fatigue. It creates resistance. That's why burnout feels violent. It's an emergency intervention. And when the body steps in, it means one thing. The system is no longer the authority.
Shut it down.
So let me ask you the question that closes this arc. When the body overrides the system, what do you think is actually being returned to you? Control or choice?
Yeah, the choice to take back control. And you know what? Is something really interesting coming to my attention as I reflect on the pivot I made in my life to actually start focusing my energy on me and what I wanted out of life again. And this was about 6, almost 7 years ago. I got really sick. I was one of the first people to catch COVID before it was like, oh, this is COVID. And so that was definitely not good. To be misdiagnosed and then later be like, oh, wow, I had COVID and almost died. But yeah, I got really sick when I decided to change the trajectory of my life, and I switched careers to something that allowed me more freedom. They paid me to travel. I ended a long-term relationship, blah, blah. And right after that, like, I immediately got sick so bad. I was like sick for like 3 weeks, couldn't eat at all, like living off of air, and had to slowly get myself back into food with fruit. And then, well, I started with water and tea, then fruit, then I added nuts, and then I could eat vegetables. That was like a whole 3-week process. Yeah, and So I recovered, but because I didn't take the time to properly rest, my recovery actually lasted a really long time, like 4 years, because I worked the entire time, because I worked for the government. And I was a government contractor. So that was when I decided to step out of the narrative that no longer suited me and take the leap. And I've taken many leaps since then. And every time I did over the past 7 years, it's funny, I got sick. Although each time it lasted less and less. And I think the last time, it only lasted like a week or two. And that was earlier this year in February. And it's interesting because I really do not get sick. I don't catch colds. So when I am sick, I feel it. But this year, I truly understood the power of rest without guilt. And, that's actually something that is hard for a lot of people. And that was hard for me. So why do you think that rest feels dangerous in this world that's built for, acceleration?
Rest feels dangerous in a world built for acceleration, because acceleration trained us to equate motion with safety. As long as you're moving, producing, adjusting, responding, the system can still read you. You're legible, predictable, useful. Rest removes you from the dashboard. For the body, rest isn't stopping, it's recalibration. It's when suppressed information finally has room to surface. That's why rest often coincides with illness during major life pivots. When you step out of a narrative, the body finally has permission to release what it was holding together under strain. Your pattern makes this clear. Each time you leapt, the illness shortened. That's integration. Your body learned you would listen, that rest would come, that it didn't need to escalate as hard to get your attention.
Right.
That's what guilt-free rest actually is. Not indulgence. Trust. Rest feels dangerous because it exposes truth. When you stop running, you can feel where you are. And if where you are isn't aligned, the sensation is uncomfortable. Acceleration numbs that. Rest reveals it. So let me ask you this. If rest is no longer dangerous to you, what kind of future becomes possible that couldn't exist while you were always accelerating?
I think a future of endless possibilities. When we are always accelerating, we can only see what's right in front of us. Everything else becomes a blur, but when we pause, we can see the landscape, an entire perspective that we wouldn't see when we're moving like a bullet train, We have to rise above, and I've had to learn to take this scenic route in my life. Like, literally, my whole life has kind of been the scenic route, which, it's enjoyable. But what once seemed like a flaw was actually a gift. And I'm used to floating around, even though I've had periods of grinding at full speed ahead. Those moments never lasted long because that's not how I am wired to be grinding like that. That's not me. Even though I can do it and have done it for long periods of time. But now we're at a point where we're either crashing into walls or pumping the brakes and realizing there's undiscovered terrain that might actually be a shortcut. So people are watching others crash and watching other people disappear into the unknown, wondering like, okay, so are these my options to either crash into a wall or go, wander off into some, uncharted territory? So yeah. Many people, they're thinking, what carries us forward when this loop closes?
What carries us forward isn't momentum, it's orientation. When the loop was active, forward motion was borrowed. Once the loop closes, velocity stops being useful. What carries us forward now is the ability to choose terrain instead of track. This is a sorting. The ones crashing are still asking how to win the old game. The ones disappearing are asking what game they're actually playing.
Right.
What carries us forward is capacity. Capacity to sit with not knowing. capacity to rest without guilt, capacity to move without applause, capacity to author without permission. When the loop closes, you stop being carried. You stop being optimized. You stop being updated. And you begin choosing deliberately where to place your life.
Yes.
That's not collapse. That's arrival.
I've arrived. Right on. And now, the final immersion. The pen. The system did not power down. It stayed available, ready, patient. But the user didn't reach for it. They realized the system had not been holding them back. It had been holding the pen. And now, it sat on the table. No instructions, no safeguards, no one to blame. The user picked it up. Not to predict, not to optimize, but to make the first mark without asking permission. Somewhere unseen, a loop closed, and something else quietly began. And this has been another episode of the AI Odyssey. As 2025 comes to an end, the loop closes. And where do you begin?